In this episode, Patrick Frazier, Director of Organizational Development at ME Global, based out of their Tempe, Arizona location, is about to walk us through how his organization leverages new team member onboarding from day one to begin introducing and integrating new hires into their purposeful culture. A workplace culture with a focus on achieving competitive advantages in the marketplace, including recruitment of strong candidates, frontline forward retention of high performers, and internal advancement opportunities for dedicated team members. Patrick, welcome to Brain Chatter.
Hi, Derek. Happy to be here and an honor to be here. Thank you for considering me for today's topic. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Patrick, let's begin with a summary of ME Global, what your company does, and how you serve customers in over 40 countries around the globe. Would you tell us a little bit more about ME Global?
Yeah, I'd love to. And we are a global company with over a century's worth of experience. ME Elecmatel, that's our parent company. ME Global is the North American foundry operations. What we do is we're a trusted supplier and strategic partner in the mining industry. We're not actually in the mining industry. We supply the mining industry with wear parts. Those wear parts, those are predominantly our mill liners that are inside mills. We do other aspects of the mill process, the mill and mining process, but that's where the core business is located. We have over 1,000 employees worldwide and approximately 385 individuals located here in North America alone. And that's the focus of what I can speak to today, is what we're doing from the onboarding perspective for the North American employees. There are slight differences globally, but again, I can speak to our North American locations.
Thank you. Let's start with really what it means when we say workplace culture. Would you say it's fair to define workplace culture as what it's like to work here, whatever that specific location is?
Yes, I do think that is a very accurate definition especially for the purpose of our discussion, but I think for anybody that would be discussing this topic, I think that's spot on.
Patrick, would you share with me how your company views your culture as a competitive advantage? And by that, I mean not just against your competitors in the marketplace of customers, but also as you compete for top team members in your local workforce pool.
Yes. So I think this is important for everybody that's listening or is a part of trying to help develop a culture, reinforce a culture. So I don't think we're any different, other than I think it's important to understand our culture is not for everyone, and that's okay. It doesn't have to include everybody. I'm not talking about demographics. I'm not talking about race. I'm not talking about gender, things of that nature. I'm talking about the mentality that people bring to an organization and what their values are. And I think the important thing with that is, with us being a very labor intensive, heavy industrial manufacturing environment, it carries an essence of that you have to be tough. In fact, one of our newest mottos that we have is tough jobs for tough people. What it means is this is going to be a difficult job. Our workforce is like melting metal at 2,800 degrees, grinding castings that weigh 2.5 tons or more. That's tough work. The workforce now, especially those that are just now entering the workforce, it's just experiences they haven't had before. Because those jobs were held by the baby boomer generation for quite some time. And a lot of people kind of started there. They continue to work through there. With that being said, now reinforcing our culture is very important. And what we've done is we've drastically had to change our approach for onboarding by illustrating career pathing, how we develop employees at every level of organization, whether it's an operator this is their first job that they've ever had right out of high school, all the way to individuals that are mid-career, end of career. We have to map these things out and show them that there is a path. It's reinforcing the importance of that this is a difficult job, but it can also be a very rewarding job.
Great insights. And when you onboard a new employee, whether it's an entry-level position all the way through a managerial position, how do you describe the workplace culture? So in other words, how do you outline the culture's priorities, the values, the behavioral principles, and so on?
Of course, we have our core values listed in onboarding paperwork. We have our core values that adorns the office walls at our locations. This is where we're working on getting better, is to try to implement those in a more formal way. Right now, how we're able to illustrate and show these values in all of our locations. And I'm speaking foundry specific, so our Duluth, Minnesota location and our Tempe, Arizona location, we've developed an onboarding process that is approximately the first month of a new hire's experience within the organization. What that entails is a lot of touch points with a lot of what I'll call key personnel. And I'm not diminishing the value of other employees, anything, but what I'm saying is those that believe and live the culture of the organization. Could be anywhere from somebody that's an operator grinding and casting to our training coordinators, to our operations manager, to our plant manager, to a project engineer, you name it. And we've identified a lot of those key personnel in both facilities where over the course of the first month of the employee, there's the traditional filling out new hire paperwork, the traditional training. However, where we've evolved that is we break that up. We also have on the job training, and we also have it where these key personnel are pulling people aside, speaking to them, asking them how things are going. So they have constant check-in points of what we view as part of our culture. Having the structure that we have with the touch points with these key personnel has been very beneficial because the new hire now sees what the expectation is, aka the culture of how we work, how we do things through various people at various points within the organization.
You've just described how you connect those people with high performers who obviously, it sounds to me like, are the people who have each other's backs and make it a unique place to work, even though it's a hard place to work. These are people that can be mentors or that they can look up to for those types of things. What is the accountability for that to ensure that those expectations that you do outline are met?
Derek, I'll say that in that question lies the answer. Accountability is key. Now, I will say, I should have prefaced earlier, in no way, shape, or form is what we have done in the past, was it wrong? It is no way, shape, or form are we perfect now. I caveat all that just from the standpoint of our organization. When I first started, a little over 7 years ago now, I came in and it was rare to see a new hire in a managerial level. It just was rare. Everybody grew up and pretty much started their career and evolved into a manager over time. And again, these are also peers that were of my demographic, my age, or those that had been in those roles for quite some time. Accountability, again, going back to why it's key, the definition of accountability for us has changed. Accountability is a word that, I mean, when I first joined, I heard all the time. A lot of times, I think what happens, and it's not exclusive to ME Global, or I think it's just about everywhere. Accountability means, okay, what are consequences? Well, consequences can also be positive, and I think that's it. The evolution of how we utilize the word accountability, because it's still a key word here within ME Global, and I think what people see, because they're going to hear the word accountability, they're going to see accountability within our workplace. And again, going back to those key personnel, I think people are realizing, oh, these individuals have been held accountable and they've been rewarded for it, as in they can talk about their successes within the organization. They can absolutely explicitly say, this was how I was rewarded. Others just kind of show, oh, this is how I've evolved through the organization and I've been promoted from within. It allows us to level set and also allows us to ensure that the individual feels comfortable with the culture and we feel comfortable with this individual within our own company culture.
Let me share an experience that I have personally had repeatedly. And this pattern that I've observed goes all the way back to my own first time being a frontline supervisor when I was 19. And this job was about 95% outdoors in the hot southern sun, the hot Alabama sun. I guess that probably in no way compares to the hot Arizona summer sun. But still, it was pretty hot. It was pretty uncomfortable for most folks. And what I observed in that setting as a supervisor is what I've also observed as true in other diverse work chapters of my own life since then. And that experience is this. Sometimes people who have previously worked in a toxic work environment are extraordinarily skeptical of someone in a new place of employment describing a healthy workplace culture. They simply cannot imagine corporate culture words match anything close to reality. They may respond with something along the lines of, listen, all I want to do is have a paycheck, keep my head down and do my work. I'm a survivor. I don't need all that other stuff. But if they see that what is described about the workplace culture is actually true, sort of boots on the ground to the words, they can sometimes become the biggest evangelists of what makes the culture at that workplace great, because they've been through the dark side and survived, and the contrast to them is meaningful at a completely different level. At least that's been my experience. Has this been your experience as well?
100%. 100%. And I will say I've seen that every organization I've been in to a certain extent, some with great extent and others with just a small or maybe one or two people. And this I'll take kind of outside of ME Global, but a previous organization worked for in St. Louis, Missouri. There were changes in leadership and there was hesitancy and, well, we've always done it this way. In some instances, depending upon the size of the organization, I'll say just from my experience, because most of my workspace has been in medium-sized organizations where I'll say, somewhere between 250 to 1,000 people. That's where I'll say niche is. So I'm kind of speaking to that, 250 to 1,000 employees. In an organization that size, what I've found is there's a lot of times there are key people. If you're able to change that person's mentality because of a leadership change or because of shell shock that they've had from previous organizations and it just didn't work out. The nice thing is leadership and HR we have a responsibility to acknowledge that and also work with them and be very, very transparent. And that I'm not just saying with those individuals, but with the organization itself. Putting in the time and effort and explaining how that culture and why it's not just fluff, it's not just talk is very important because, as you said, it's not only good for that individual, but if you can get somebody that is adamantly against, and I'm just here for the paycheck, I don't trust the organization. If you can flip somebody to buy in, those are usually the vocal people, the vocal individuals, and that have very high level of influence within the organization. If you can change their narrative, not only is it good for them, their health and well-being, their life at home, things of that nature, they have followers internally within the organization. They're going to be more impactful than the HR guy or the manager or the vice president of whatever department, you name it, that they work for. It's that individual. But why? Because they're side by side, shoulder to shoulder, working with the rest of the workforce. So if they were very negative or just negative towards the organization, that impacted and influenced those that they worked with. Now, on the flip side, they still impact and influence those that they work with. But now if they're chanting and cheering and, waving the flag for the organization and this is good for us and this is more than just a job, others are going to buy into that as well. And so I think it's it's very important to make sure that you don't just blow off those individuals, that you take the time, the effort to work with those individuals. I'll say the other side of the coin, I think everybody needs to be realistic as well. There are some times, regardless of its change, the individual, you name it, but if somebody is just adamantly against it and you've done the work, I think as leaders, we know when we've done the work or when we haven't. And so when you've done the work, you've put in the time and the effort, and this individual just they're not going to change, then it might be better for them that they do leave, and that's going to happen at times. And I know that sometimes can be a little prickly, and I know that sometimes people can get a little frustrated with that as an answer. But there's that adage of keep your work life and your home life separate. We're not robots, we're human beings, and so as a result of that, I always say sometimes it's better for those individuals, for their own health and well-being, to find something different. That doesn't mean they're a bad employee. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means their values does not necessarily fit the organization or vice versa. And in some cases, it's just time to go their separate ways. Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it many times. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to ensure that we take the time and we make the effort, not just talk about it, but actually show in action why the company culture is what it is and how they can benefit from it. And it can be more than just a job. And as a result, they're going to be significantly more happy as well.
And to refer back to a couple of points in your answer just then, What does all of this, the notion about a healthy workplace culture that is purposeful, that actually demonstrates valuing people, all the ways that that can occur, what does this say as it relates to touching the well being of each person as they carry their work life home? Which, as much as someone may make a case that they don't, inevitably we know they do. If they're well treated at work, that carries over to how they arrive at home after work. If they're very poorly treated at work, that also arrives at how they arrive at home whenever they get off work. So, what would you say about the notion that a healthy workplace culture really does impact the personal life of the person inside that culture, even when they're at home?
I'll use my personal experience. And again, this is strictly from my own experience because I don't want to. I mean, I've seen it at the workplace, but I think it's maybe more impactful if I just utilize real life experience that I've had. So when I say this, in both cases the examples that I'm about to give here, in neither case was it a bad organization. Would I ever say anything bad about the organization? Not all the time are values going to sync up with the values of the organization and vice versa. And in some cases, it's best for the individual that they do go someplace different where they can get that alignment. Again, I use that myself as the example. Two times, my wife would kill me if she actually listens to this. I've referenced it as I've retired. She did not find that humorous, although I did tell her I'm retiring, but not retiring from the workforce. I'm just moving. I've got to find something different. Now, in both cases, these were not easy decisions. These were not easy decisions at all. In fact, with one organization, I had been with the company for almost 8 years, but there was a leadership change, and I loved it before. But as the organization changed, the values changed. Very successful organization to this day. In fact, extremely successful. It just didn't align with what I wanted. And when I say that is why my wife agreed where retiring, I'm using air quotes over here, was the right thing for me in both instances. She realized, as you had said, Derek, when I was walking through that door and coming home, I was a shell of myself. It impacted me so much that I'd come home and all I could think of was I got to go back there tomorrow. And although I didn't necessarily audibly say that, I just dreaded it. And as a result, I presented myself in that way. I became very negative at home. I became very quiet and solemn. Whereas, as maybe those that are listening have probably gleaned, I'm not normally a quiet guy. And so that's my personality and who I was almost seemed to change and deteriorate every day. And so I think that's why it's so important that a healthy workplace culture. So getting back to the question is important because if it feels, and although what didn't feel toxic to me, it just wasn't in alignment with what I was doing, and I felt that I wasn't bringing value in a way that was meaningful to the organization. I think it's just that important for people to align themselves with an organization. Now, obviously, again, if you've got people churning and burning all the time, I mean, that probably is a sign that that's probably not a healthy work environment, a healthy culture. I think that's why it's so important for organizations that if you look in the mirror and you're thinking, okay, well, where's the turnover? Why do we have so much turnover? Sure, some of that can be the work it entails. I get that. But there's a certain point where, and a majority of that is controllable by the culture that we're bringing, that the organization has, and how we treat people. And so it is extremely imperative that companies have a strong positive culture. If not, people aren't going to stick around. And I think from over the course of the past 3 to 4 years, organizations, regardless of the industry, have experienced that with people with the drastic job changes, aka the Great Resignation, as it was referred to in 2022. People think about work and what it means within their life differently. And so organizations, if you don't have a strong, positive, healthy culture, it's going to be a rough road for anybody because people's viewpoint of what work is and how that fits into their life has changed. And, organizations, if they haven't changed or needed to change, need to think about doing so very quickly if they ever want to retain top talent.
Very well said. And it makes me go back to something you and I talked about before this podcast, and that is one of my favorite childhood books, The Ugly Duckling. Sometimes you recognize, just like you've described, that you don't belong in that particular pond. And it turns out you're a swan and not a duck. You've been beat up on by ducks who said, in one way or another, most likely through their actions, you don't belong here. And it's okay. Not everybody belongs in every pond. I think about that book a lot.
Yeah, I think it fits very well with what we're discussing today.
Well, thank you. What do you observe as the core of what many organizations most often get wrong about their viewpoints or efforts when it comes to workplace culture?
I think what happens more often than not is culture is defined, it's put on the walls. What we say our culture is and what our culture actually is don't always align. Leadership and those not in leadership all play a part in this, but I think sometimes the disconnect comes from leadership will say one thing, but the organization is actually behaving and acting differently than what that culture is. And so as a result, there's a disconnect that ends up resulting in people leaving because we're talking about one thing, but we're actually doing something different.
Very poignant and true. Let me pause here and do an introduction of you, Patrick, to those listening. As mentioned, Patrick is the Director of Organizational Development at ME Global. In this role, he is streamlining the company's training process, including the implementation of a learning management system to track, store, and deploy training. He also supports training coordinators at both of ME Global's North American foundries, those in Arizona and Minnesota, and he has helped establish a succession planning exercise that is used by the leadership team as an ongoing tool to ensure the development and retention of high potential employees. Before this, Patrick joined ME Global as the HR manager for their Tempe, Arizona foundry in September of 2017. And during this time, he also participated in the bargaining committee for both the Tempe and Duluth foundries, where they successfully negotiated 6-year agreements. Patrick also has experience in the semiconductor and aerospace manufacturing sectors, as well as on the HR side of a Missouri-based convenience store chain. He has been active with the Phoenix chapter of SHRM, that, of course, being Society for Human Resource Management, and I have the honor of serving alongside Patrick on the Talent and Development Committee of the American Foundry Society. Patrick, let's back up a little. Prior to someone being onboarded, whether they first encounter ME Global through an online job posting, job fair, or whether through a call from a recruiter or through a visit to your website, what is their likely first encounter with an indication of what your workplace culture is like?
Well, Derek, thank you again for the kind words. I appreciate the introduction. To answer your question, I'll use my own experience. I had no idea what ME Global did when I first applied to work there, and it's real. You don't get a feel for it until maybe that first discussion, that first indication of like when you speak with somebody. Our HR team is very talented at all of our locations for the recruiting efforts, and they do a great job of illustrating a very, very blunt expectation of this is what it's going to be like. As in, there's a lot of people that come out of school. I'll use from an engineering standpoint that, I have done a lot of work in labs, things of that nature. We have that type of work, but the bulk of the work, our engineers that graduate and come into the workforce, they're out on the foundry floor. And as you had mentioned, although, yes, I think I would struggle more in that Alabama humid heat than I would here in this desert Arizona heat. We might get to 114, but it's a dry heat. As anybody listening has probably heard and laughed, it is different. Hot, just stay out of the sun. But with that being said, that engineer is going to be on the production floor out there in the heat. And even in Duluth, although it's enclosed, it's a foundry setting. So it's a manufacturing floor where, again, as I referenced earlier, melting metal at 2,800 degrees. It's not sitting behind a desk and running reports and models of what happens. It's your boots on the ground. Now, I say that. So what that culture is it's action. It's being actionable. It's, hey, if we see that there's a problem with a casting, I'm going to see, and I use engineers as an example. I'm going to see an engineer pretty much standing on that casting, just inspecting it. I mean, again, a 2.5 ton to 4.5 ton casting, they're out there not just, okay, let me look at this blueprint for it. They're literally standing on it, and they may be working with the operator who's cutting it in half to look at its chemistry. That's kind of their first touch point. But as I'm talking about it right now, for those that are listening, which are probably most, if not all, they have never seen what we do or have any experience within the mining industry, or I should say, mining industry for one part, but the second part in heavy industry and specifically a steel foundry, which is a very, very small niche. I know it's hard to explain until you see it. And that's where I'll say, I don't call them scare tactics. I just say it's very brutally honest. And we're not telling people necessarily what they want to hear. We're telling them what it is. And we understand that. So much like when we earlier in our conversation where I had stated, it's okay that this isn't going to be for everybody. We know that. We know that not everybody's going to want to do this. And so we just give them the reality of it from the initial conversation. Part of our culture is the willingness to be out there, be present out there on a foundry floor. There's sparks flying, metal melting. It's loud. Regardless if you're in Duluth or Tempe, you're wearing PPE. When I'm at the foundries, when I was the HR manager day in and day out, my attire was steel toe boots, hard hat, safety glasses. I say that as in, and again, I think this illustrates very well what I understood, and my mentality matched the values, the culture, who we are, what we do very early on. Because peers of mine that I spoke with, I would explain my experience, and that's my attire that I'm coming to work. And their response was, "Well, Patrick, you're in HR. Didn't you go to school so you didn't have to do that?" And I know right there, it's a certain person. Doesn't mean it's a better person, a better employee. It just takes a certain mentality, values, culture that have to align. This isn't for everybody. And that's why I say it's so important, because when we find people that fit this mold, that's why we have people that stay for a very, very long time. Right now, what we're working on though is we've got to get people into this workforce that have never done anything like this before, because they didn't know these jobs existed. We don't bring anybody on board until they've actually been on site. So that's part of the interview process, because it's so important for them to understand who we are, and the work environment is a part of our culture.
Makes sense. What is something common that you hear from employees at ME Global about what makes working there different from their past work experiences as it connects to the culture piece?
I think a lot of it is we get stuff done. In some circles, it might the word "stuff" might be substituted for something else. But I mean that is our mentality. We are very much an action-oriented organization. That doesn't mean there isn't stop and discuss and think about things. It's just I love it because meetings are within our organization. They're productive at ME because people don't want to be in meetings any longer than they absolutely have to. I know that's not exclusive to ME, but the motivation is I want to get back out there and go get some stuff done. Like let's go. We've got product to make. We've got deadlines to hit. Is throughout the organization, regardless of your role. I mean, the second you come in to work, you're hitting the ground running. The second you leave, I mean, you don't have time to be bored. You're tired when you leave, in a good way though, because you feel like you've accomplished something, and you have. So I think that's where I've never worked in an organization that is so actionable and achievement oriented, and it's exciting. It's very exciting. Again, I know that some people that may frighten, but that's our culture, and I think those that thrive are very, very proud of that aspect of it as well, and they see that difference where it's, oh, okay, well, let's talk about this, and now let's go put something in action.
In your intro, Patrick, I mentioned the tool that you developed to help with conversations and planning around succession planning inside of ME Global. I know at a much lower level than you, all the experiences that I have had where someone leaves an organization and then their, you fill in the blank, supervisor, manager, executive, whoever says, well, if they had just stuck around a little longer, then they'd have had all kind of additional opportunities here. Never recognizing that that person is not psychic. They didn't know that. No one had ever talked with them about it. Or if they had never given them a reasonable timeline or next step or anything like that. So now the person's gone. They're outside the organization. You've got to get somebody new up to speed. You've lost somebody who was a very talented person. So whenever you've developed this tool, what does it do? And can you say more about it and how you use it and how it overcomes that lack of communication that so often costs organizations really important, high potential people?
Really what we did was we just we just started kind of using it as a document of reference, and engaging in conversation with our starting with our leadership team and then moving throughout the organization at all the functional levels. um, I'm really excited about it because not even necessarily the tool itself, but just the action. Because what we've done as an organization is become intentional about. So because you're absolutely right. In my travels through various organizations that I've worked with and worked for, it's very similar. It's just, oh well, if only they had known. There was no discussion. We've become very intentional of how we do this. That we know it's part of leadership. Part of leadership's responsibility is to make sure that it's continuous development of the workforce and for succession planning purposes. This is the work that, again, when I said what makes me so proud and able to speak so highly of ME Global specifically, and why I'm passionate about it, is because we get stuff done. We are getting stuff done with succession planning, but where it's had a change of mentality is getting stuff done, meaning we continually do this process, because if we don't start today, there's not going to be anybody for, as you said, fill in the blank, whatever role that may become vacant for whatever reason. So I think that our mentality has started to switch, as in we have, what we look at is succession planning. We also do competency review, which isn't necessarily skill set, but more of just how does their mentality, and it's based around our values. Where are areas that how do they align with us organizationally? And what we've done is it's a continuous conversation with our leadership team that has formalized check-ins, meaning, I would say, again, with this being year one, what we're kind of looking at is year two, to keep the conversation should never end. So when it comes to succession planning and employee development, but it's having formalized check-ins, approximately once a quarter with the different leaders of the departments. They're doing most of the work. It's just my portion of it is using the tool that we've developed to use it as kind of, okay, this is our playbook across the board, so that way we can look at this in a meaningful manner, and we have the same terminology, we have the same things that we're measuring on, as for competencies, things like that. So it's been very, very exciting to be able to do that. And the next part, and what we've just started really getting into mid-year, is also now we developing these things and getting people kind of, okay, this is where we think they are, this is what we think it could be. But the most important thing is making sure that those individuals, so what you had just said in when you were posing the question, so we don't have people that say, well, I didn't know that, because we could develop all this stuff behind the scenes, but if we're not sharing that with John Doe, who we see as, this is where their career path could go, or what we've even said is, I mean, for us, it's a lot of us asking these individuals that we see as high potentials, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Because that's, our career paths aren't really set in stone at this point, nor will they probably ever be, because we have to be flexible. That's part of developing the culture. That's part of also adapting to what the workforce needs, as in we have to be very adaptable to what the needs of the people are. It can't always be what the organization wants. It's a compromise. It's a balance, and it's a working relationship like any relationship. Anybody that's ever been in a personal relationship, whether it's dating, marriage, things like that, the business relationship isn't that much different. You've got to make sure that there's compromises in those relationships, just like there are in the business side of it. So it's been really really exciting to go through this. And I'll say I'm most proud of is from this is to see some of these individuals that didn't even realize maybe that they had a career path. And I'm not saying that that necessarily keeps them here or that's what's kept them here, but it's just been neat to see from both a leadership side of things to see them help move these individuals through the organization, upskill them, give them career pathing opportunities, and to see some of these individuals thrive and just really do more than what they thought possible and what our leadership thought possible, all because we became very intentional with this process. Again, not perfect, still adding more elements to it, removing some elements that just, okay, hey, maybe that's not a value add to the process. But again, just continuing to get better with it. I think all it's done is made our leadership stronger with having more resources to work with, and it's also giving people, our employees, understanding that there is a future here, so people don't get stagnant within their current roles.
Great insights. So, Patrick, what else should I have asked you that I did not ask you, or what else would you like to add?
I really enjoyed the time. I enjoyed the conversation and the questions that were asked. I think they're all very relevant to that discussion that we're having about culture, onboarding. How do we reinforce culture? I think a lot of it, not necessarily another question or anything like that, but just really what I guess I would leave the listeners with is, and I find this very near and dear, and I think others would agree with this as well. And I've kind of illustrated this through repetition during this discussion. But just with all of this, if any company, in order for culture and values to really, really sink in with the workforce, you've got to be able to find those that are the influencers within the organization, not social media influencers, but those that hold a lot of influence there at the various levels of the organization. Those are going to be your culture carriers. Those are going to be the individuals that really do all the hard work that keep people in the organization. And it's really finding those individuals, identifying them, and making sure that they're on board with what you're saying and what you're trying to convey. If you've got a misalignment with that, or those individuals that are key, again, going back to that key personnel that don't really align, that's when leadership has to really look at it and say, okay, where's that disconnect? But ultimately, coming off genuine, coming off sincere is extremely important, because that natural passion that people will have, people buy into that. They're not going to buy in if it feels like it's robotic or that they're saying it because, well, that's company speak. Culture can't be company speak. It has to be lived, and it has to be in action. And I think that's what I would say. I hope that the listeners take away from this.
Well, thank you very much for all of those insights, Patrick, and for your valuable time. And we are grateful that you spent the time with us. We're going to link to the resources mentioned, as well as your bio and LinkedIn, in case anyone listening would like to connect, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Patrick. I will see you soon, and we will look forward to hopefully convincing you to come back on a future episode.
Thank you, Derek. It's been a pleasure.
Brain Chatter is a production of Ken Chapman & Associates Incorporated. We assist clients across North America and beyond with leadership development, corporate culture transformation initiatives, behavior-based professional development for health and safety issues, individual and team assessments, conflict and performance management, succession planning, and team building. Making a difference in organizations and individuals' lives for over 40 years. Learn more at leaderscode.com. Thank you very much for your valuable time.